preparedness.com. World is one.
WION Health Resort is unique, the only one of its kind. Experience the 4 paths of natural wellness: yoga, Ayurveda, acupuncture, and naturopathy. Each uniquely customized program improves the whole person to make every person whole. Come to WION Health Resort. Make your reservation at WION.com.
It's code red for humanity. The alarm bells are deafening. Wildfires, floods, and hurricanes. Extreme climate events warn of impending doom. Is the world heading towards a climate catastrophe? Watch WION's Climate Tracker weekdays at 12 p.m. GMT, 5:30 p.m. IST.
You don't know how to fix the holes in our ozone layer. You don't know how to bring the salmon back up a dead stream. You don't know how to bring back an animal now extinct. And you can't bring back the forest that once grew where there is now a desert.
You have ignored us in the past and you will ignore us again. We have run out of excuses and we are running out of time.
Show us your faithfulness. Show us your trustworthiness. Show us your honesty. Prove us wrong. We desperately need you to prove us wrong.
Hello and welcome. You're watching Gravitas with me, Priyanka Sharma. Here's what's coming up on the show tonight. If you're a parent watching me tonight, you must be worried. Your child probably has a cough. He or she is probably sniffling, battling high fever. Sleepless nights for you have now become the norm. Some call it the flu. Others are calling it RSV, and some are blaming the Wuhan virus. Kids as young as 1 are now being nebulized. You're afraid to send them to schools, to parks, to their playgroups. Your pediatrician is telling you to ride it out and not panic. But it's agony to watch your child suffer like this. And your fears are justified. The Wuhan virus is back. A new variant is sparking more fears. Children are falling sick across the world. Why? Is there a pandemic among children? What don't we know right now? What should you do as a parent? These are all questions you need to ask. And tonight on Gravitas, I'll attempt to answer most of them. We'll also tell you how India is ramping up its COVID preparedness, while China, the culprit behind the Wuhan virus, is making the same mistakes again. Also on the show, the bikini killer, the serpent, call him what you will. Charles Sobhraj is set to walk free. The world has been fascinated by this murderer for decades. His story has been brought to life on TV screens. Tonight, I want to ask you, why are we romanticizing serial killers? Is life imitating art? We put our scrutiny on the BBC as well. The British Broadcasting Corporation, its commercial arm, is producing ad campaigns for a Chinese propaganda channel. Does the BBC have the right to pretend to be ethical, impartial, and transparent anymore? And loud dinners and louder guests may be causing you plenty of anxiety this holiday season, and I don't blame you. Not everyone is currently in the Christmas spirit. Tonight, I'll tell you how to cope with holiday anxiety. All this coming up on the show. Is your child safe from the Wuhan virus? Should the surge in infections worry you? Is the new wave going to affect children? I know. For some, it may be too early to ask these questions, but the fear has entered the hearts of most parents. Why? Developments like these provide the answer. This report is from Japan. It says the Omicron variant is claiming lives of healthy children. Yes, almost half of children who died this year in Japan did not have any underlying diseases or conditions. And now look at this report. It was carried by CNN. It says children's hospitals are already full of sick kids in the United States. They're now bracing for a potential increase in hospitalizations. It is not only because of a spurt in infections from holiday gatherings. The report further says that for the last few months, not just the last few days, pediatric hospital beds have been consistently 3/4 full. In fact, the chief medical officer of a children's hospital in the state of Colorado has issued this warning. Allow me to quote, "While we certainly hope that families and friends have an opportunity to gather and spend time together this holiday season, this is also a time where we often see spikes in viral infections. There is still plenty of RSV, COVID and influenza circulating, and we encourage everyone to take precautions to keep themselves, their children and others healthy." And then you have reports like these. It says, many countries in the Northern Hemisphere are now witnessing a spike in respiratory infections. Infections like influenza and RSV, it says that these infections are running rampant, leading to waves of hospitalizations and deaths, particularly among children. It doesn't quite end there. This next report is from Canada. It says the flu has returned with a vengeance, and it's hitting children especially hard this winter. The same story in the UK. RSV, strep A, the flu, a range of familiar bugs have left children gasping for air in Britain. The BBC says childhood diseases are making a post-lockdown comeback. Now, before I go further, let's get some facts straight right away. In some countries, it is the Wuhan virus which is affecting children. In others, there are respiratory diseases making them sick. But are these two connected? We cannot be sure at this point, but you see, kids are falling sick. They are complaining of a sore throat, congestion, fever. Babies are being nebulized. As a parent, it's agony to watch. Let me explain why this is happening. First, because respiratory infections spike in the coldest months. A winter Christmas is always sneezy and sniffly. There's always a viral siege. But things may be different this time. Yes, experts say that they are blaming the lockdowns for this. You see, when the Wuhan virus rampaged around the world, we introduced strict lockdowns to stop the transmission. Children were kept out of schools for weeks or months on end. And now they're mingling again. They're back inside classrooms, back in parks. So naturally, diseases are returning. Many doctors call it the immunity reboot. Again, I'm not saying this, health experts are. Look at this report. It says the strange behavior of viruses this year is an indirect consequence of the pandemic. Last year, lockdowns and hygiene measures suppressed their spread. As a result, many children did not have the opportunity to build their immunity against them. And now that these measures are all but gone, these viruses have found a large pool of susceptible babies and children to infect. And this is primarily what explains this surge globally. The children who were shielded from these diseases are now all of a sudden exposed to them. What's worse, they don't have the immunity to fight them back just yet. So what does this mean? Will this make children more vulnerable to the Wuhan virus? Will it increase their chances of getting infected? We don't have a clear answer yet. But there is a lot of speculation, plenty of predictions, and they all say the same thing. It's better to be prepared, better to be safe than in lifelong lament. It's better to vaccinate your children. If you speak to an expert, a pediatrician, a doctor, he or she will tell you that nothing is unusual. Infections of all kinds are spiking, especially at this time of year. Here's in fact one such expert that we spoke to earlier. Listen in.
Children, apart from some rare complications, which also they're generally recovering from, don't really, are suffering really from COVID or having very severe illnesses. As far as the other viral illnesses like flu that you're mentioning, that is very much a part of growing up. Because as a child is born, he has no, apart from some antibodies that his mother gives him, the baby has no real knowledge of, organisms. So every time the baby meets a new virus, a new bacteria, it's an introductory phase or a game that they play. So every child falls ill maybe 2 or 3 times in a year, URTI, an upper respiratory infection, in the first 3 years is par for the course for children.
So you heard her. What she's saying gives you some kind of relief. But the thing is, the virus is unpredictable. It's been 3 years and it's still not gone. So we don't know what it's currently capable of. We're also hearing of mutations, newer variants. At the same time, you must not ignore cold and flu symptoms. It could very well be the Wuhan virus. If you need more proof about this, look no further than the country which gave us this virus, China. Researchers say that the BF7 Omicron subvariant, the one that is circulating in China, has a higher capacity to cause reinfection or even infect those who have been vaccinated. It doesn't matter who they are. The elderly, children, or even pregnant women. In fact, such is the scale of the tragedy that China has started accepting foreign vaccines. Don't forget that this is the same China which boasted of 9 vaccines without proper testing. An appliant who gave its sanction. Look at the headline on your screens now. For the first time in 3 years, BioNTech vaccine shots will be made available in China. For the unversed, BioNTech vaccines are made in Germany. Now this is an intriguing development because as far as we remember, China had insisted on using only domestically produced vaccines. Vaccines that are not based on Western mRNA technology, but on more traditional technologies in China. So why is it taking German vaccines now? Is it because its own vaccines have failed? We don't know. But what else could be the motivation behind this move? Which brings us to another question. What again is going on in China? For the last 3 days, we've been telling you We've been bringing you videos of what's unfolding over there. Unfortunately, even that has stopped. No new images are now flowing out from the country. All we have are reports based on correspondents stationed there. And here's the most telling one. It's from Wuhan, the place where it all began, the place where this virus was first identified. Reports say in Wuhan there's now a creeping sense that more suffering is coming. The city is already experiencing a second surge. Its residents are worried that infections could spike further as the winter becomes more severe. What's worse, we may never really know what's going down in Wuhan or any other Chinese city for that matter. Here's why. The World Health Organization says that China is quote-unquote behind the curve in reporting COVID cases. It's the same story. It says that it's struggling to keep a tally of new infections. Struggling. That's the word that the WHO has used. But is it really? Or is China deliberately not reporting infections? Is China deliberately downplaying the scale of suffering? These are questions we've asked time and again, and we'll continue to ask them in the days ahead on the show. Because our world just can't afford a rerun of that nightmare called 2020. Now this brings us to India. Last night we told you how the Chinese subvariant had reached India. Tonight, I want to tell you how India plans to stay ahead of the game, how health officials in India are taking no chances. To start with, the Health Minister of India has said that quarantine structures may return along with mask mandates. This announcement came shortly after the Indian Prime Minister held a high-level review meeting to assess the situation. Present in the meeting was the CEO of Niti Aayog along with officials from the Ministry of Health and officials from the Home Affairs Ministry. And here's what the Health Minister of India said in Parliament shortly before the meeting began.
We're monitoring the situation. Changing variants and the risk they pose are under watch. Social awareness and monitoring increasingly being done. Genome sequencing is also being done. In view of the upcoming festive season, mask, hand wash, social distancing are some of the things that should be ensured. Random sampling at airports of those coming in from abroad has also started from today.
So what sort of guidelines is the centre expected to issue? We're awaiting a formal announcement for that. But what we have received are details of what the Prime Minister emphasised on during the meeting. To start with, he cautioned against complacency and advised officials to maintain strict vigil. Second, he emphasised the need for strengthened surveillance with a focus on genome sequencing and increased testing. Third, states have been advised to ensure operational readiness of hospital infrastructure. Fourth, the centre plans to ask people to adhere to COVID-appropriate behaviour, including wearing a mask. Yes, the mask advisory is back. Fifth, the Prime Minister stressed on a precautionary dose of vaccination for the elderly and vulnerable population groups. Now, these are just initial details. We're, of course, expecting an official statement on the guidelines from the Health Ministry. In the meantime, it helps to look at the COVID case tally in India. Remember, India's COVID numbers are currently at their lowest since the pandemic began. In fact, they have been on a steady decline for the last 5 months. According to the latest data, India has reported just 185 new cases in the last 24 hours, and besides these, there are just 3,402 active cases, and no deaths have been reported since Wednesday. These active cases comprise 0.01% of the total infections, and if we speak of India's recovery rate, it stands at an impressive 98.80%. So what does this tell you? That India is not at risk, not yet. And it might not be. If we look at some factors, to start with, 96% of COVID vaccines given in India are either the Oxford AstraZeneca or Bharat Biotech's Covaxin. On the other hand, most of the vaccines given in China are indigenous vaccines like the CoronaVac or Sinopharm. We've said it before on the show, they're bogus vaccines. Countless studies have proven that Chinese vaccines are less effective than the ones given in India. CoronaVac offers 60% protection against the virus, while the Oxford AstraZeneca offers up to 76%. So that's one reason why India is currently at an advantage. The second reason is that a large share of the people in India has already been infected with COVID-19. You see, China's strict lockdowns have led to fewer people in the country building natural immunity to the virus. But that's not the case in India. Pan-India studies show that the virus had 62% prevalence in India back in July in 2021. Since then, the figure has likely grown. In fact, 22% of infections in India has happened only since mid-December last year. That said, these figures shouldn't give way to complacency. Like I said, the virus is unpredictable, and yes, India may be currently at an advantage, but we still cannot afford to let our guard down. So I suggest that you put that mask on immediately. Now, since we're talking about China, you may remember this. Last month, a BBC journalist was arrested in Shanghai. The journalist was covering protests which erupted across China against the zero-COVID policy and the ruling Communist Party. He was allegedly beaten up by Chinese police officers. The BBC, as any organization would, condemned China's actions swiftly. It said it was extremely concerned by the events. Several BBC journalists called out China and its authoritarian regime. They accused China of snatching away media freedom. We have no problem with this. Now let's talk about this man, Richard Pattinson. No, he's not a celebrity. He's a former BBC journalist who currently is the senior vice president of a little-known commercial wing of the BBC called the Storyworks. You must be wondering, why are we talking about a BBC commercial wing? Allow me to explain. Storyworks was established in 2015 and describes itself as a commercial content studio with newsroom values. It very much sits within the BBC studio and produces sponsored content for brands and entities. To win new clients, Storyworks depends a lot on the BBC's presumed reputation of impartiality, independent journalism and, of course, trust. From Taiwan to the Wuhan virus to suppression of rights under Xi Jinping, the BBC has been reporting on China taking on its oppression. But what if I tell you tonight that the same BBC is making money producing glossy tourism ads for China's propaganda machine? Let me break it down further. The BBC Storyworks has partnered with at least 18 Chinese clients since 2015, including state-affiliated bodies. It has produced tourism campaigns for state-owned media outlets, including CGTN, the state's mouthpiece. Interestingly, the CGTN was banned from broadcasting in the UK. CGTN serves as a cornerstone of Xi Jinping's so-called publicity front. And Storyworks is also a loyal partner to Huawei, the tech firm that has been sanctioned by both the US and the UK over national security fears. I'd like to state more facts. The BBC does not publish Storyworks' earnings. The commercial unit is not mentioned in the BBC annual report, and the BBC refuses to disclose how much money Storyworks actually makes, especially from its contracts in China. Storyworks contributed nearly $360 million to BBC's overall ad revenue, and that's this year. How much of it comes from China? The BBC doesn't reveal. I'll also tell you what the BBC had to say about it. It insists that Storyworks has played by the rules. It says hosting advertising outside of the UK allows them to generate income to invest in BBC, including in their so-called independent and impartial journalism. It says commercial work is entirely separate and has no bearing on journalistic output, but reports say its own journalists are opposing contracts with the Chinese. Sources say that the BBC newsroom has voiced anxiety about doing business with Chinese state-affiliated entities. Don't these commercial ties leave the BBC open to accusations of conflict of interest, especially when it comes to its reportage on China? And this is exactly what the BBC journalists voice. But the corporation has even remained silent on why the conflict of interest concerns raised by its journalists had been ignored. So tonight, I want to call out the BBC for its duplicity, its hypocrisy. What gives it the right to position itself as the beacon of impartiality and transparency when it is taking money from the same country that it claims to condemn in its editorials? The relationship between Britain's publicly funded broadcaster and mouthpieces of Xi Jinping's hardline regime is out in the open now. Reporting on atrocities against the Uyghurs in China and working with the Chinese regime to strengthen its propaganda, if this is not duplicity at its best, then what is? Does the BBC have any right anymore to call out European MEPs, lawmakers, who are currently at the centre of a graft scandal for accepting bribes from Qatar? I ask, what is the difference between a corrupt lawmaker who condemns Qatar for its human rights record while taking bribes from the country, and a news outlet which claims to act in public interest and then takes money for ads from a country which is infecting the world? Can the BBC take a moral high ground anymore when it comes to journalism? When money and commercial interests come into the picture, has the BBC compromised its ethics? We ask this question and we wait for a response. Let's move on now. The bikini killer, the serpent, serial killer. These are just some of the names for Charles Sobhraj. He's set to walk free from a prison in Nepal. The Nepal Supreme Court has set him free due to his age, after 19 years in prison. Sobhraj today is infamous for his heinous crimes. His story has been brought to life in popular programs. His horrific crimes have made headlines, but the fascination with his persona continues. So tonight I ask, is television creating a murder celebrity culture? And how does it impact all of us? Take a look.
A thief, a fraudster, a serial killer who was once among Asia's most wanted criminals is going to walk free from a Nepal prison after 19 years. We're talking about the bikini killer, the serpent, Charles Sobhraj. The Nepalese Supreme Court has ordered the release of the French serial killer who preyed on tourists travelling on the hippie trail in South Asia in the 1970s. But why is a serial killer who has committed several brutal murders being allowed to walk free? The court says because of his old age. Sobhraj is now 78 years old. Back in the day, the serial killer was described by many as handsome and charming. The charismatic conman evaded the law in several Asian countries. He used his looks to befriend, rob and then murder young backpackers, to use their passports for his own travels. Sobhraj, who has French citizenship and is of Indian and Vietnamese descent, has been linked to the killing of at least 20 foreign tourists across Thailand, Nepal and India. In 2003, Sobhraj travelled to Nepal where he was wanted for several murders. He was arrested while he was at a casino and was subsequently sentenced to life for murdering an American tourist in 1975. In 2014, he was given a second life sentence for killing a Canadian backpacker. Sobhraj made headlines in India as well when he was caught and was lodged in India's biggest prison, the Tihar jail. He served a 2-decade sentence in India. However, his stay at the Tihar jail was not that of just another criminal. Sobhraj bribed guards with gems and large sums of money. The systematic bribery of prison guards was at an outrageous level. He lived a life of luxury inside the prison. Gourmet food, television, French newspapers, interviews to Western authors and journalists. In 1986, when his extradition to Thailand for a murder was almost certain, Sobhraj threw a lavish party for his guards and fellow inmates, whom he had befriended over the years. And what happened next has never happened in Indian history. Charles Sobhraj escaped India's biggest prison after feeding the prison guards cakes, cookies and grapes, all laced with sleeping pills. The Tihar jail has had only 6 escapes over 50 years, but there has never been one like this. The jailbreak triggered a nationwide manhunt. After 22 days, he was arrested at a popular hangout joint in Goa. Before the arrest, he was reportedly riding around on a pink motorbike in outlandish disguises, hence the name The Serpent. For years, a weird animal magnetism drew millions to Sobhraj and his life. Those who've met him say the gaze from his joyless eyes was compelling. Interest in Sobhraj's life only peaked. So much so that he's been the subject of 3 non-fiction books, a Bollywood film and an 8-part BBC-commissioned documentary series. Over the years, Charles Sobhraj, a serial killer, obtained a celebrity status.
Les amis sont toujours les bienvenus à la maison.
Serial killers have been popular subjects of recent OTT shows, documentaries, true crime podcasts and books. There is an increasing tendency to romanticize them. People often want to know the stories of a serial killer and not of victims or survivors. They're often given catchy nicknames like Sobhraj was given. Sensationalizing serial killers gives them more infamy and notoriety. And often that is exactly what they crave. Such tactics may get more views for shows or sell more books or papers, but it comes at a cost. There have been several instances across the world when real-life serial killers have taken inspiration from crime-based shows or content. Makes you wonder, is art imitating life, or is life imitating art? By sensationalizing and romanticizing criminals, are we not creating a murder celebrity culture?
Our next story may give hope to some. It might be a small win for the women of Saudi Arabia. Female students will no longer be allowed to wear abayas in exam halls. Abaya is a loose all-covering robe which Saudi women wear in public. Saudi Arabian women were forced to wear the abaya in the public for decades. The dress code was strictly enforced by the police, but women finally decided to speak up. Campaigners urged the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman or MBS, to loosen the conservative dress code, and their effort was successful. The enforcement was lifted in 2018, and the Crown Prince said women should wear decent and respectful clothing. Whether they wear the hijab or the abaya is a personal choice. It seemed like a huge victory, but just in theory, despite the Crown Prince's push for social reform, nothing really changed in practice. Saudi women continue to suffer at the hands of the dress code police, but they rebelled. Saudi women started a trend on social media. They posted pictures wearing their robes inside out. Many joined the movement. They switched to colorful robes in stark contrast to the traditional black. Women wearing open abayas over long skirts or jeans became increasingly common. And years on, Twitter wars continue about reinforcing the abaya, and at the helm are those who have never worn one. Ever since Mohammed bin Salman has come to power, he has tried to push for women's rights. MBS has a long-term development strategy called Vision 2030, and under this plan, he aims to reduce gender discrimination before lifting abaya compulsions in 2018. Remember, he ruled that women should be allowed to attend sporting events and drive cars. Now, this was a monumental change for a lot of women. Prior to this, many had to let go of their careers due to difficulties related to commute. Many couldn't afford daily taxis of private drivers. But being allowed to drive changed all of this. It gave them the freedom to work and run errands at their convenience. In 2019, Saudi Arabia announced the Women in the Workplace initiative. It mandated equal pay for equal work. The policy strives to make the environment more hospitable and safe for women. Women are also allowed to apply for passports and travel abroad now. Now, you may be watching me from other parts of the world where all this is the norm. These are basic rights. But believe me, it has made a huge difference to the lives of women in Saudi. You see, there seems to be a slow liberalization taking place in Saudi. Recently, Saudi Arabia called on the Taliban's decision on women's education. It has asked the Taliban to reverse the ban on women's higher education. The kingdom is surprised by the Taliban's ruling. It says the ban violates Afghan women's legal rights. Mohammed bin Salman is vouching for women's rights, and he has received due praise for that. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. There is still a list of things that women cannot do in Saudi Arabia. And this list is longer than the Crown Prince's reform. They cannot get married or abort a baby without a male guardian. They also cannot leave prison or a domestic abuse shelter. And Saudi Arabia's stance on freedom of opinion still remains rigid. Several women's rights activists have been imprisoned in recent years. Some face restricted freedoms even after release. So the road ahead remains long. The kingdom has now banned abayas in an exam hall. This sure indicates a shift in the conservative norms. But can it truly be called liberal? Pay attention to the term here. The robes have been banned, not made optional. That already happened about 4 years ago. Banned. An imposition, however liberal on the face, is still an imposition. The ban might empower girls to not wear a robe. Maybe it will give them an excuse to stand up to forceful guardians. But what if it backfires? What if girls who are forced to wear abayas by their guardians stop coming to examination halls altogether? Isn't the risk a little too high? Saudi Arabia is at least trying to move away from conservatism. You already know what's happening in Iran. An oppressive regime has stifled dissent. It has made a mockery of human rights. The country is smoldering with protests. Executions are being handed out, all because women are demanding to make their personal choices. So whether it's bans or enforcements, anything that is imposed is bound to suppress rights. And what we believe is the freedom to make personal choices is what matters truly. Let's move on now. If you know someone who's battling Alzheimer's, you would know why this next story is so important. Japan is paving the way for a simpler and faster diagnosis of Alzheimer's, the most common cause of dementia. The country has approved one of the world's first blood test kits to detect signs of the brain-wasting ailment. Will this be a breakthrough in Alzheimer's research? Our next report has some answers. Take a look.
Memories that you can make in your lifetime are meant to be cherished. A memorable trip with friends, sitting by the river on one fine evening, watching the sunset. Watching your favorite movie with your partner. The first time when your child walked or uttered his or her first words. Countless memories which we make as we grow are meant to be cherished, to be looked back upon, to reflect, and to be grateful for the journey. But what if all your memories are taken away? Alzheimer's, the most common type of dementia, is a progressive disease that begins with memory loss and possibly leads to loss of the ability to carry on a conversation and respond to the environment. Speak to someone living with an Alzheimer's patient and they'll say the patient is a shadow of their former self. In mild Alzheimer's, a person may seem healthy, but could have more and more trouble making sense of things around them. The problems can include memory loss that disrupts daily life, poor judgment, loss of spontaneity, losing track of dates or knowing their current location, taking longer to complete normal daily tasks, forgetting recently learned information, trouble handling money and paying bills, losing things or misplacing them in odd places. Alzheimer's is often diagnosed at this stage. It is ranked as the 7th leading cause of death in the United States. Estimates say 1 in every 14 people over the age of 65 and 1 in every 6 people over the age of 80 is affected by it. A breakthrough therapy for Alzheimer's could finally be on the horizon. The experimental drug lecanemab has shown potential as an Alzheimer's disease treatment. Drug makers Biogen and Eisai announced that the drug has been found to reduce cognitive and functional decline by 27% in Phase 3 trial. This is being seen as a breakthrough in more than 100 years after signs of the disease were discovered. Billions of dollars have been spent in research by companies all across the world. The promise around the drug has started a global rush to make these products faster. In the latest, Japan has approved one of the world's first blood test kits to detect signs of Alzheimer's. This paves the way for a simpler and faster diagnosis of the ailment. The diagnostic product measures the amyloid beta in the blood, which is an abnormal protein that jams nerve cells in the brain, and is a marker of Alzheimer's. This diagnostic product has been authorized by Japan. The kit will give doctors an easy and minimally invasive tool to screen people faster. Currently, the screening is done through PET scans, MRI, or painful spinal taps. The diagnostics and therapeutics market for Alzheimer's disease is likely to touch $9.6 billion by 2027, from $7 billion in 2021. The Alzheimer's Disease International estimates dementia could affect over 80 million people globally in 2030 and over 150 million in 2050. If this product works, it could offer a ray of hope to those diagnosed with this debilitating illness and also to those living with them.
Right, let's talk about food now. Have you heard of this dish, Chicken Tikka Masala, otherwise known as Chicken Tikka Masala? Well, it wouldn't be wrong to say that all of us get a little emotional when it comes to food, and more so when it is rooted in our culture. One such dish is Chicken Tikka Masala. The delicacy has sparked a fair share of rows. Indians, the British and Scots are particularly possessive of it. So let me tonight ask a controversial question. Who really invented it? Chicken Tikka Masala is one of the earliest examples of fusion cuisine, which has spruced up to suit the taste of a particular group, and for this one, Glasgow-based chef Ali Ahmed Aslam claims the credit. Let me give you some background. In the 1970s, a Scot wandered into an Indian food joint, Sheesh Mahal. He ordered himself a sizzling plate of chicken tikka, but the dish didn't satisfy his taste buds. He returned it, complaining it was too dry for his palate. And that's when an insulted Ali Ahmed Aslam dumped a can of tomato soup into the dish. He mixed in some spices and herbs, added a dollop of yogurt, and the rest is history. This was Chicken Tikka Masala, or Chicken Tikka Masala as some of you may call it, a fusion of South Asian cuisine altered to the tastes of the United Kingdom. Aslam, who was originally from Bangladesh, passed away earlier today. He was largely credited for the invention of the dish. Now, there's no significant evidence behind this, and it might just be another urban myth. But Glasgow strived to cement this claim. Lawmaker Mohammed Sarwar vouched for Glasgow's monopoly over the Chicken Tikka Masala. He demanded the EU to officially recognize Glasgow as the home of this delicacy. His argument was Glasgow's contribution to the popular cuisine deserved to be recognized. But the MP was 8 years too late. In 2001, Britain's then Foreign Secretary Robin Cook named Chicken Tikka Masala as the British national dish. He claimed the dish was a perfect example of how Britain absorbs and adapts external influences, or should I say, steals other countries' heritage. Chicken tikka is very much an Indian dish. There are no debates around that. But when it comes to Chicken Tikka Masala, controversies are sparked. Why? Does simply adding a few more ingredients to a dish make you entitled to its origin? Take this as an example. Indians have spiced up varieties of pizzas with an Indian touch. So if we follow Britain's argument, India can claim the pizza as its own. But how would the Italians feel about that? And would that claim be right? According to some experts, Chicken Tikka Masala's origin can be traced back 5,000 years ago to China, to the time when tandoor or clay ovens were invented. It is one of the many things that the Britons took back from their colonies. There are a number of theories attached to this dish. And with the two nations' imperial history, the debate has now become messier. Some believe it was a royal Mughal dish. Others credit Ali Ahmed Aslam for it. Many think it isn't a new dish at all, but a toned-down version of the famous butter chicken. The true origin of Chicken Tikka Masala largely remains a mystery. We don't know who invented the dish. But one thing we know is it has won the hearts of millions of foodies worldwide. Now I have another question for you. How do you feel right now? Another year has wrapped up. The holiday season has begun for most. Despite some COVID panic in the air, people are still making travel plans. They're shopping. They're planning to catch up with family. Festivity is in the air, but so is anxiety. Ever heard of festive anxiety? Believe it or not, it's a thing. It could be a sense of panic or worry which usually trickles in around the holiday season. Your eating patterns change. You throw out all healthy habits out the window. Feel a sense of guilt as you enjoy your favorite foods. You feel you're on edge. Some even complain of mood swings, and I don't blame you. Look around you. Christmas trees are up, a fancy brunch is laid out, children are running riot, someone at the table has had one too many and is cracking jokes at your expense. This is a typical scene from any gathering in the holiday season, not exactly what makes for quality time. The holidays present a dizzying lineup of demands: cooking multiple meals, shopping, baking, cleaning, and of course, entertaining. And if you have kids, you're struggling to keep them on schedule. A time to unwind ends up becoming a stressful time. And don't forget, COVID fears are back. So you may be seeing a spike in anxiety levels, especially if you're entertaining unwelcome guests. A lot of this anxiety has to do with gifting. Take a look at this survey now. It came out in December, and according to the American Psychiatric Association, nearly a third of Americans say they are anticipating being more stressed this holiday season than ever before. And no, it is not just the Wuhan virus which has got them worried. They're worried about affording holiday gifts. And that brings me to another important point. Do you feel undue pressure to choose the perfect gift for your family year after year? No matter what the cost, is it stressful to find the perfect present given rising costs of living? This pressure or expectation to outdo our gifts increases year over year, and there's a term for it: giftflation. Let me show you some figures. In the UK, retail Christmas sales are predicted to hit £82.2 billion. Now we're talking about the same country where the cost of living crisis is